Hello, and welcome to Rogue Artisans and Crafters. Our show is about featuring local artists and craftspeople from within Southern Oregon. We will talk to our featured artists about how they came to their art, what drives them as artists, find out stories behind their art process, and how their work as artists has affected their lives. Today, we have the privilege of featuring local sculptor Yvonne Kitchen. I discovered Yvonne recently in her work while visiting the Art de Jour Gallery in Medford, where her bronze sculptures are featured. Yvonne's sculptures focus on horses and other animals, and she describes her work as bronze portraits from nature. Her work is beautiful, and I'm pleased to be able to introduce her work to our audience. This is our part 2 show, talking with Yvonne Kitchen about her life as an artist and her work in bronze sculpture. And Yvonne, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, David. I'm always happy to come and talk about my babies, as I call them.
Yeah, well, that's totally understandable because they're incredibly beautiful sculptures, and I can see that as how, as an artist, you would become extremely attached to the work that you do because you put so much detail and effort into them, and it's really, they're incredible works to see.
Well, it also takes several months to get them to completion, so you're quite invested by the end of that.
I would imagine. With this particular show, we're going to talk about stories behind each of these pieces of art, and in general, are most of these pieces all commissioned pieces?
No, they're a mixture, actually.
Okay.
Some are commissions, and actually one of them is a commission that, the only one in my entire history that went awry.
Oh,
I was commissioned to do a piece, and the people who commissioned it gave me feedback when I was working in the clay section of it, and then they disappeared.
Oh, okay. Well, that makes work.
So then I waited 2 years and went ahead and completed the piece, and it now is an award-winning sculpture.
Okay. Well, in general, I mean, we have a total of 6 extremely beautiful examples of your work. And in general, I look at each one and I have to wonder how long each piece has taken you to completion. I mean, are they all consistently about the same amount of time?
No, it's really quite interesting. Probably the most interesting to me example is Elegance here, which is a portrait of a Frisian stallion. And he was from reference photos I took of the horse that's in my large piece called Frisian Spectacular, which is a musical ride and drive performance. And he is the lead horse, Aaron, in that particular ride. And I happened to catch him balanced on the 1 foot in about 5 frames in a row. And I put that aside knowing that someday I was going to go ahead and sculpt it. And then in the meantime, I saw a wonderful Belgian mare, this particular breed mare, playing and running just so with such exuberance, and I thought, oh my heavens, I have to do them as a counterpoint to each other. And so that had been kind of soaking in my mind literally for several years, and it took me less than a month to do that piece.
Wow.
Because it just sort of did itself. And a number of them have been that way, but most of them, truthfully, are 2 to 3 months.
Okay.
And what takes me the most time is doing the person.
Right.
The horses I literally can do blindfolded. That's not quite true with humans.
Yeah.
But the people are still recognizable. In fact, the gentleman, the piece that's in front of Elegance, that piece is called Florida Cracker Cowboy, and that happens to be my veterinarian daughter, who is a cow vet, by the way, her cattle partner, Dr. Jerry Spears, and his lovely horse Valentine, and then Ruby is the dog beside him, and he is a true 3rd generation Florida Cracker Cowboy. And so the bullwhip that he's carrying is actually his grandfather's bullwhip that was handed down to his father and then down to him. And Florida Crackers, if you don't know what Florida Crackers are, these were generally people that came out of paupers' prisons in England to the southeastern United States, and then were working on the big plantations, buying their freedom. And in the plantations, they used those whips on the slaves.
Right.
Very black part of history that they're not proud of in the least. But when they bought their freedom, they went to Florida and they homesteaded land and started running cattle. And with all the palmetto thickets and everything, you can't get a horse through a lot of them, but as you're finding your way, they pop those whips over their head like this. They don't hit the cattle with them. They just make a characteristic sound. So you literally, if you know these guys, if I have a wonderful photo I took of my daughter, who's actually riding a colt, so she didn't have a bullwhip at the time. But there were 5 of them across the back of a herd of cattle, and 4 of them had the bullwhips in the air at the same time in the picture, and then they also had their dogs beside them. The dogs go through the thickets and push the cattle out. And so that's a portrait of Dr. Jerry Spears and his mare when they were both young, younger than they are now. I did that in the 1990s. So that one was actually done in 2 stages. He lost Ruby, she passed away, and so it was only when he got another dog that I was able to literally have him walk around the barnyard to have the exact placement of where the dog has to always be with their nose behind the left stirrup. So that's all accurate. The equipment is his saddle, which I took many pictures of his saddle, took many pictures of him, to his embarrassment, by the way. And it was really a labor of love because he's almost like a second father to my daughter.
Right.
And then next to him is one of my favorite pieces, and this is called Hobbled. And this is the one I mentioned in our first series that people literally recognized in the clay, like the piece that was, when it didn't even have its ears on at the Draft Horse Classic. A bunch of mule skinners are there because they perform between the classes for the draft horses.
Okay.
And each one of them, as they'd come by the back, and they said, "That isn't Concho, is it?" They all recognized Concho. And at the time that I did this, he was doing a clinic in Shady Cove, Oregon. And I fell in love with this mule, who was only 3 years old at the time, and took many, many, many shots of them. And I asked him if it would be all right if I did a sculpture. And he said, "Oh, I would be honored." And so he let me literally crawl up underneath the mule to take pictures of how his cinch fit under his belly. And I took many pictures of the hobbles, and it's called Hobbled because every time he stopped working with this mule, the hobbles went on the mule.
Okay.
So he's being trained at the time. Then another one of my loves, because I raised literally hundreds of them, are white-tailed deer, Florida white-tailed deer in particular. And this is Wally, and Wally was one of my babies that I raised, and the piece is called Taking Flight, and it's really characteristic with the white-tailed deer when you see them going over things with that tail up in the air. And so he's going over a pine tree, and as part of what we were talking about before, the process, the tree that he's going over is actually a dead limb off of one of my own pine trees.
Okay.
Is how I did that particular one. So that's as easy for me to sculpt a deer as it is for me to sculpt a horse, truthfully, because I have handled so many deer over the many, many years. And then this is my little commission piece that went awry, and I call it Presence. And this particular colt was here in the Rogue Valley, and his trainer, when he was a colt, is who commissioned the piece for himself. And then he and his wife left the valley, and no one could trace them. And so I decided after 2 years I could go ahead and finish it.
Yeah, right.
Arabian breeders today, this is what I would call a modern Arabian. The Arabian horses that I've ridden for the last 50 years were not nearly as long-necked and as fine-legged as this. They're much heavier bone. And my sport that I used them for was 100-mile riding. And so I wanted a horse that was sound of mind and body, that could literally be happy at the end of 100 miles.
Right.
This is a show ring peacock, as I call it, or as I call him, the giraffe, because this is not my style of Arabian. But they are beautiful. There's just no two ways about it.
Yeah.
And then this is now, this particular bronze is now the High Point Trophy for the National Belgian Horse Show in the United States for the junior exhibitor. And I did this piece for myself because it's a portrait of my daughter literally braiding the tail of one of the Belgian horses that she learned to braid on when we lived in Michigan. And this is her at 13 years of age, braiding the tail as she used to do it. But the background story on this is that the little girl that I put rolling the mane, Diane actually did both. She rolled the mane and then did the tails and then jumped literally to the next horse and did it. But this was her best girlfriend, who was terrified of horses. And so we sent her a picture. After I had the bronze completed, Diane sent her a picture on her Christmas card. and of course, at that time, they both were in their 40s. And so she telephoned Diane back, and she said, "Oh, Diane, I've got my comeuppance. My daughter is horse crazy, and we just bought her first horse." So that's kind of the background story of this. But the reason this ended up being the trophy, is that there was a lady in Wisconsin who was a mentor to many generations of young people learning to groom horses, as Carlene had been to her, teaching her to groom the horse, who teach life lessons, not just grooming horses. And when this lady passed away, all of her friends got together and they saw this piece and they said, would I be willing to sell them a casting of it to use as a High Point trophy for the state of Wisconsin, for their state fair, which I did, and they did, and the lady that commissioned it, that particular casting, her husband built a tall trophy so it could be a perpetual trophy with the, you know, with that on top of it. And she took it with her to the national show to show everybody. And the president of the Belgian Corporation of America, which is the breed organization, said, oh, that's too good a trophy to be just for the state of Wisconsin. Would you go back to your donors and see if they would be willing to let us have it for the national show? So in perpetuity, my daughter is going to be there, having benefited from a mentor, and honoring young people who come behind her.
Yeah.
And so to me, that's a very special bronze.
Yeah.
And so, and on the lead-in, on those pictures you showed 3 of this horse, who, by the way, this horse's name was Major, this many years ago. And what I did is I did it as a series, which I would love somebody to actually have put on one base, but haven't gotten that far. So first of all, the girls braiding this horse, and if you're wondering what this silly thing is, that represents the baler twine, that when they're grooming these horses and when they're braiding them, this is a 4-strand braid. And if the horse puts their head down, the braid all pops out with all that pretty ribbon in it. So what they do is they put just a light, like a dog leash chain or baler twine up to the rafter, and then the horse literally goes like this and goes to sleep. So I don't know if you're going to get a tight enough close-up, but this horse's eyes are half closed and his tongue is actually sticking out. And that's from a photograph I took of a Belgian horse actually doing that. So this is the first of that series, and that's when they're actually grooming him. Then Major Ready to Harness is the next one, and on that one, he's totally braided. This braid here is made into the little knot with the rosette like she has around her tail, or her ponytail, is around it. So he's all decorated. So he's all standing there all proud, ready to be sewn. And then the last one is called Harnessing Major, and that is actually Dan Kreitz, the breeder of this horse, aged about 30 years from when he taught Diane how to braid, really putting the collar over the head. And that's another example of my detail, is everybody that's seen it knows that that collar is accurate, that that collar would actually fit that horse, and that all the hardware on that collar is there and is accurate. And I've had many light horse people say, well, why would someone stand in front of that great big horse and put a collar on? Wouldn't they get hurt? And those collars are extremely heavy. These horses are extremely well trained, and they're extremely gentle. And that's how they do it. They literally stand in front of them, where you wouldn't do that with a light horse.
Yeah, right. Well, it's, you know, I look at each of these pieces and just I'm overwhelmed by the sheer attention to detail. I mean, your ability to capture so much detail is such a really remarkable thing, and that's really impressive to me. And the fact that you incorporate people into the sculptures that are connected to each animal.
They're integral to the story.
Yeah.
They really are. Yes.
So each piece really represents a full-blown story to be told for that particular animal, and it's really, I find that very cool.
It's kind of cool to do it. And a little funny aside on Hobbled is that I sculpted him totally separately, and then you put him in, and they literally, and these were also sculpted separately and were welded from underneath. But what I did is, when I had him done in the clay, I literally stood over him and I laid him on his back so you could see his face, because it's really difficult to see his face. And I emailed those images to him, and he got his wife's approval that I actually caught him, that it was really his face. And so then she gave her approval to go ahead and buy this rather expensive bronze.
Yeah, right.
And it is a rather expensive bronze.
Yeah.
And so I was quite thrilled that she got a kick out of the fact that I laid him on his back, but so that she could see his face. Yeah. So these faces are all of real people, just like the horses are.
Yeah, yeah. And when you were when we were meeting earlier in the week, and I was listening to your stories, and that was something that just really struck at me, was how you've got these real people being also represented in such detail that corresponds to their relationships to the given horses and animals. So I think that's a really cool thing to see.
Well, I don't really want to do something stiff and posed. I'm trying to tell a story,
Yeah.
and usually there's some kind of action. Even though you're stopping the action, there's some kind of action to it. Even with the gentleman, he's standing still, but he's lifting. You can see that the muscles on his arm, that he's lifting that big collar.
Right.
So that it's really important that it be accurate, so that's what people see when they see it. They see what the story is.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a remarkable thing, and I just love it. It's because compared to other sculptures and other sculptors' work, I mean, it's there's so much liveliness to what you do. And,
Well, thank you.
You know,
I hope so. But as I say, and the other thing is for me is it's wonderful memories, because each one of these I remember. All the photos that I took in reference to that, I remember Wally, but this particular buck was a real character, and so I really remember him. So it brings all that back as well. Yeah. And the Florida Cracker Cowboy, I remember because I caught a snapshot of him having just unloaded the mare out of the trailer, and they both looked at my daughter, who was getting ready to do pregnancy testing on the cows, and they were going to get another bunch of cows. So that whole story is part of it, and my daughter's part, who isn't in the sculpture, of course, is also part of the story that I remember. The other thing is that I now have a herd of 60 horses at my house, none of whom mess up the barn. And at the barn, I have just one old 38-year-old mare, and she's a lot more work than these guys are.
Yeah, it's just that one of the things that I remember from our visit earlier in the week at your place was that you've got such a library of binders of documenting the process for each project. So I found that also really impressive, that the process you go beforehand in terms of gathering your photos and doing your drawings and really planning things out is such an extensive thing to see.
Yes.
And so I've done a lot of different types of art in my life, but I never have been so detail oriented as what you do, and it's really an impressive thing. So now these you talked about like this one piece here having been selected to be used as an award.
Right.
But in the course of your career, you've garnered a variety of other awards. Oh
yes. Well, I'm trying to think. Well, I guess it so happens I haven't brought one that didn't win an award somewhere. Quite truthfully, most of my awards have been national rather than this. I'm a full member of the American Academy of Equine Art. In fact, I have a Clydesdale piece called Power and Elegance that's in Aiken, South Carolina, as we speak. I don't know if I have an award on him yet, but that's another real live horse. And it's really wonderful to get awards. But I think what's more important to me, anyway, is those people that recognize both the person and the animal and give me praise for that. And I think, oh my heavens, I don't know quite how I did that, but I feel so great that I was able to do that, and to see the joy on their face when they recognize that. The interpersonal relationships, I think, means more to me than any of the awards. And as I say, it's really nice to be honored by your peers, which is truthfully. Most of my work sells through juried shows in other parts of the country rather than here. I don't sell a whole lot of the big bronze. I do sell a lot of the littles here. As we all know, Medford is not the richest area in the United States. And I do have collectors all over the United States, which is also wonderful. But it's when I can actually interface. Means a lot more to me to actually sell a piece face-to-face or to do a piece for someone face-to-face than to have it sell at a show that's in Colorado Springs or in Denver or in New York City or wherever, because then I don't get that feedback. And I think that also was probably the most important part of nursing to me was, as an RN, the kind of feedback I had not only among my peers, but among my patients.
Right. Now, you know, you've been at this for quite a while now. How many, in a general year, how many pieces do you produce?
Quite truthfully, I'm slowing down because I'm 80 years old, which does tend to do it. So at this point, I'm really only doing 1 or 2 a year.
Okay.
There was a time when I was doing 4 or 5.
Okay.
But I do have some health problems that make long hours standing at a sculpture stand or sitting. I do most of my sculpting with sitting down rather than standing because I have a bad back. Too many horse wrecks over too many years, truthfully. So what I was doing when I was really going full speed ahead after I retired as a nurse in my 60s, actually then, what I would do is I would work a solid 4 hours generally, and I might go back to it a little bit in the evening, but I need light, and so that was part of it. And now what I find is that I have a hard time making it much beyond 2 hours at a time.
Right.
So that has definitely slowed me down.
Okay. So, I mean, you're, how much longer do you think you're going to be able to continue to produce this wonderful work? I mean,
Well, you know, it's hard. You can see me with my hands going all the time. It's hard not to have a piece of clay in my hand. And the nice thing about the littles is they're made out of a polymer clay, which you actually bake in your oven at 275 degrees. And I can literally sit with a towel across my lap and work on them, or I can braid my necklaces, or I can do my sterling silver jewelry and those kinds of things. And so I think it's becoming easier to do those more often than it is to do the bigger bronzes. So it is kind of, in a way, that's twilight, but I can't see ever stopping.
Yeah.
As long as I can sit up and use my hands, I'll be
Right.
creating something.
Yeah. Well, it's you're a remarkable talent, and I'm just I can't say enough how many times I'm just really impressed and kind of blown away by the beauty of what I see when I see your work.
Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate that.
Yeah. So you definitely have a super strong fan here
Very
in your work, and you definitely deserve every accolade that you can get.
Well, it'll be nice for you to see when Ebony gets finished, and she's gonna be as black as this horse.
Yeah.
She's solid black.
Yeah, I definitely look forward to seeing that. So, yeah, you'll have to let me know when you get
I
done
will
with
do
that
so.
with that process, because definitely love to see that. And you know, there's I'm trying to think of what else we can really cover at this point, because we've covered so much. But if someone wants to commission a piece from you, what's the general approach that they can just contact you through your website?
That contact me through the website or at the gallery. Either way, I get, but through the website. The gallery also has a website, and I can get it through the gallery website or the physical thing. I always work at Art du Jour Gallery on third Friday when we have the art walk, and I'm the one that sets everything up. So I'm always there. So people that come to Third Friday Artwork can see more of my work and can discuss the thing, which that way has worked really quite well. I prefer, if I'm doing a commission, to be able to take my own photographs.
Yeah.
Occasionally I will. I did a lovely Rottweiler dog sculpture for a lady, and he'd been dead for almost 10 years, but he was the winningest Rottweiler apparently, certainly of his generation, if not forever. And so she had albums and albums of pictures. And when people want to commission, I actually have a form that they fill out where they actually have to go and measure their animal, if the animal is still alive to do this with. And then I have, obviously I have a contract spelling out all the terms and what have you. But I need measurements of the thing, because in order to get the proportions, you really need to know. And I need proportions for some silly things like on a dog, how big their paw is.
Right, yeah.
And so her one was quite difficult, because she had all these confirmation shots from dog shows, and they're all posed from the left side with the dog set up square, head pulled up with a collar and looking left, which doesn't tell you, and I'm working in 3 dimensions, it doesn't tell you what his face looks like from the front, doesn't tell you what the right side of his face looks like, what the right side of his back, or what, for that matter, what his rear looks like. And so I had to ask her for did they have any high quality snapshots of the dog during those years, which they did. And those ended up being as much help as the big ones.
Right, yeah.
Yeah. So, and with Ebony, I went out and did a photo shoot of the mare as she is now. And the mare is quite elderly, so she's not in show shape. But the owner also had a bunch of lovely photographs of her in action. So I have her, actually I have her photo album, and I've enlarged some of her pictures. And when I do one that's a show animal, what I always ask, if they want to use professional photographs taken by a pro, they have to get written permission from that photographer because he owns that photograph.
Right.
So I never use a professional photograph unless I have the signed release from that particular artist who is the photographer.
Yes.
And I learn more if I can see the animal in action and I can actually do a photo shoot myself.
Yeah. Well, that gives that makes sense because you've got to really get that sense of the animal.
Right.
Right. Well, Yvonne, I really enjoyed you being our first guest to our new show.
It's been fun.
So,
I've really enjoyed it.
Yeah, and I'm sure that that we hope this garners you a whole bunch of more fans.
Well, I hope so.
Of your work. So, so this, I have to say, is we reached the end of our show, Rogue Artisans and Crafters. And we thank you at home for joining us and learning about our featured artist, Yvonne Kitchen. And we thank Yvonne for being our featured artist to start our new show series about Southern Oregon local artists. We also want to thank our crew who made it possible to put this program together. And please make sure and check out Yvonne Kitchen's website where you can get more information about her art. And I'm your host, Glamour Dave Nienow. And we will see you next time.